microaggressions can be anything from somebody knocking on your door at a nice home and saying, "Is the owner here?" That's not micro when you're the owner and you're answering the door in your drawers and somebody's asking, "Is the owner here?" It's quite aggressive. And the same in the workplace. It is mansplaining. It's when, you speak up as a woman about a great idea and then somebody literally repeats what you said and then everybody's like, "Oh, that's a great idea." It's an aggression. I actually think that the term is synonymous with dismissing the aggression. It's just call it an aggression.
Yeah. I like that. Just call it what it is.
If you think about a microaggression, it's not something that the person on the receiving end feels is micro whatsoever.
Let's be honest. When it comes to a thriving career, we're all still figuring it out. Welcome to the Still at Work podcast. On this show, we take questions about navigating the workplace and work them out together. I'm Kim Taylor, head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Coursera, and I'm your host. Let's get to work. Hi, Ebbie.
Hey, Kimberly. Excited to be here.
Do you want me to refer to you, as just Ebbie, or do you want me to say Dr. Parsons?
I'm cool with Ebbie. I'm really cool with Ebbie. Typically, if I get introduced as doctor, other people will say I'm doctor, but I'm cool with Ebbie.
More about Dr. Parsons, or Ebbie, as I'll call him for the rest of the episode. He holds a doctorate of education in organizational leadership from the University of Pennsylvania. As the co-founder of Yardstick Management, he's worked with companies you might have heard of, like Facebook, Netflix, and Amazon to support their work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. With that kind of street cred, I wanted to ask him about something that happens everywhere. Yes, it can happen at work, but it can also happen at school, at the grocery store, even in your own home.
Microaggressions can be anything from somebody knocking on your door at a nice home and saying, "Is the owner here?" That's not micro when you're the owner and you're answering the door in your drawers and somebody's asking, "Is the owner here?" It's quite aggressive. And the same in the workplace. It is mansplaining. It's when, you speak up as a woman about a great idea and then somebody literally repeats what you said and then everybody's like, "Oh, that's a great idea." No, it's aggressive. It's an aggression. But microaggressions present themselves in many different ways as we think about what people experience in the workplace. I actually think that the term is synonymous with dismissing the aggression. If you think about a microaggression, it's not something that the person on the receiving end feels is micro whatsoever. It's quite macro if you're on the receiving end of a microaggression. So, but I think it makes the aggressor. It makes the aggressor's action more palatable, right? If you say microaggression, it minimizes the impact of the aggression, and so the term microaggression itself is dismissive of racism. It's dismissive of sexism. It's dismissive of the impact of the aggression. Just call it an aggression.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. Just call it what it is. Our listeners had some questions about microaggressions, or aggressions, as Ebbie calls them. And I'm really glad we have the opportunity to address this today, because back when I was coming up, I often found myself wondering how to respond in these exact situations. Question 1. I've been on the receiving end of microaggressions at work, but I don't know how to address them without escalating the situation. Any advice on how to handle this delicately? Question 2. I've witnessed microaggressions on my team. How can I be an effective ally in these situations? Do you think that microaggressions are always unintentional or always intentional?
I think they're always rooted in ignorance. But I don't think they're either always intentional or unintentional. I think it's a mix of the two. But they're always rooted in ignorance. They're always rooted in bias. They're always rooted in a lack of understanding of the impact of the words or behaviors. If you think about the types of experiences that happen, who doesn't get invited to the happy hours or who doesn't get invited to the birthday parties, it's easy to just say, oh, they didn't think about it and make it, oh, it's unintentional. However, they intentionally built the relationships with the people that they built the relationships with. Whether it's in the back of their head, subconsciously or consciously, there's intent in relationship development. There's intent in who people think are important versus not. So that's why I say it's always ignorant, but I wouldn't say that it's always intentional nor always unintentional.
So what advice would you give to people in this situation?
Often I've found that calmly walking people through how ignorant they sound and what it might feel like without even seeming like you're doing it intentionally. And this requires a lot of savvy, right? So, if you're on the receiving end of why are you so fired up, well, because Becky was really fired up, and I noticed that Becky got a great response. And and I remember when Brett was fired up and how he won this award. It's ways to really show them their ignorance. And hey, remember when Brett got that promotion because he was so fired up? I was under the impression that being fired up was a way for us to focus on delivery, to show our passion for the work that we're doing. You really start questioning them and their behavior and calmly asking them the why. And it makes them feel very uncomfortable and squirmish because they start realizing that they rewarded the exact same behavior for a completely different demographic.
That's such great advice. And I think your insights here are very valuable for the person that is experiencing the microaggressions. Let's talk more about allyship. Why is it so critical in today's work environment? What can others do who may not be the person that is being aggressive, and they may not be the person receiving the microaggression, but they're still in the room? What would you say to those people? How can people show up as better allies to their coworkers in these situations?
The importance of allyship is the allies, and the allies have to be in large numbers, have to be just as upset as the person on the receiving end of the microaggression. So it really is a whole culture that has to shift. And of course, you're going to require some bravery. There's going to be some people that have to stand up and stand out before everybody else is on board. And that can be anybody at any part of the organizational hierarchy. It doesn't need to be the C-suite. However, the C-suite would be extremely beneficial. But if you can get people to just recognize this is unacceptable and to have other people around them agree that it's unacceptable, that's the way allies can stand up. Allies shouldn't have to wait for Kimberly to speak up for herself or to make the aggressor feel uncomfortable. Allies should be, well, of course she's fired up. Remember when you rewarded Jeff for being fired up? Remember when Brett got fired up? You've got to think about allies as having the willingness and the courageousness and the ability to just speak up immediately. They can't wait until you're outraged. They can't wait until their colleagues are sitting in the corner crying. They have to do it immediately. There's an urgency to allyship.
Are there any do's and don'ts to allyship? What are some common mistakes that people make when trying to be allies?
I'll give you an example my wife experienced at a previous employer. It was based in Atlanta, a company based in Atlanta had, didn't celebrate Martin Luther King Day, which is a federal holiday. And she raised this as a concern. And an example of the allyship was, you should take the day off because she's the Black woman. Not that this is a federal holiday in the birthplace of Martin Luther King, where he literally led the civil rights movement, and it's Atlanta, Georgia. The don't of the allyship was, you should take the day off. It wasn't, we should change our policy. We should observe this national hero. We should observe a federal holiday. but instead it was, you should take the day off. Those are examples of don't. That's a great example of a don't.
There's a thread around courage that I hear. And I think that, being brave enough to risk your own position, your own privilege in the room, and having the courage to, like you said, be just as outraged or bothered or insulted as the person who's experiencing the microaggression is like key to being a great ally. I also think that it has to be woven into the fabric of the culture. I mean, yes, a person can be brave on their own in a workplace culture that doesn't necessarily reward allyship. But that's a harder, mountain to climb than standing up for your peers when you are also a part of an organization that celebrates allyship and makes space and has leaders who showcase these same characteristics. I truly believe that leadership has to demonstrate this. And, sometimes that's hard because leaders have blind spots. We all have blind spots. But I think leaders, can be the biggest allies for people on their team and just have to kind of like take a step back and look at their own bias, unconscious bias, and take inventory and understand who's being overlooked or who is being stereotyped, or who, in the room is quiet but may have something to say. What advice do you give to those companies who are looking to integrate DEI into their spaces?
You've got to think about how profitable it is for your employees to represent your customer base, because they understand the lenses and the language of all the customers you're looking to attract. And frankly, they are the customers. And so as we go through this, we went from the Great Awakening and all of that to now like the Great Remission or whatever. I don't even know the right language for what's happening as it relates to DEI. We have to really be intentional about understanding that DEI is the most profitable thing you can do from an employee perspective. It is more profitable to be diverse. It's more profitable to be inclusive. And we have to speak the language of the business. It should never be a tangential cost center. And instead, in order for us to do well as a business, we have to do good by our employees. And our employees need to represent all of the customers that we want to take on. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there's a pitch to, hey, you should do this work because it's the right thing to do. But then there's a whole different kind of pitch where it's like, hey, we need to do a competitive benchmarking analysis. Who's winning in our space? And almost always the people who are winning in their space are the most diverse.
It's such a large topic of discussion. And I feel like we could talk about this for hours and hours. I want to bring it back down to the everyday person who is experiencing the microaggressions in the job. How important is it to document these incidents?
The unfortunate reality is, like you said, it's a journey. And if we're talking to like your base level employee, particularly anybody from a marginalized background, document everything immediately. You want to have a running log of your experiences. You do want to have the tools. You want to equip yourself with ways to combat them without being combative. Kind of how I was saying, like, hey, but what about Brett? He just got promoted for that. You want to have the language, you want to have the examples to support your claim and to be able to essentially deter the microaggressions. But some work cultures are just frankly toxic.
Yeah, it's death by, like, well, they say 1,000 paper cuts. That's the microaggression feel. And I think that's something we should spend just a little time talking about. How do microaggressions make people feel? What's the harmful effect of allowing this type of behavior to happen in the workplace? What does it do to your workforce and to people from, marginalized groups?
I mean, what's micro about being belittled, feeling less than, being excluded? I mean, what is micro about feeling like I don't belong? And, it's nothing micro about it. I mean, it's just aggression. It's sexism. It's racism. I mean, just use the word.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges a lot of corporations face is we want to make it something that's digestible and palatable to the parties that be who are more than likely committing the acts. But if we start really realizing that the people on the receiving end of microaggressions are victims of microaggression and use harsh language like victim, because that's what they really are. Like you said, death by 1,000 cuts. We didn't say like hurt by 1,000. We said death. I mean, like, look at the impact of the word death. I mean, and it's death to their career, or at least their career at your organization.
Right.
And we already know how much it costs to hire a person, recruit a person, train up the new person. I mean, there's so many costs to microaggressions that completely deplete profitability. Like, it's expensive to behave poorly.
Ooh, that's a t-shirt. It's expensive to behave poorly. There was another question that I had here in my notes that says, if I think I may have said something that could be considered a microaggression, what should I do? What would you say to that? Because I guess, like we talked about before, all microaggressions may not necessarily be intentional, but they are rooted in like you said, a place of ignorance. So now that I'm examining myself after listening to this podcast episode, and I say, man, I may be an aggressor in the workplace, or I may have said something. How should I approach that situation?
I think the aggressor had the courage to be an aggressor to begin with. So have the courage to apologize, acknowledge, recognize what you've done. It's not just behave differently the next time, but also let people know, I see you and I screwed up and I'm sorry. It goes a long way.
It does.
It goes a long way when you acknowledge, you know what? I was in the meeting and I don't know why I listened to Chad instead of you when he said the same thing that you said, but I apologize. And that was your idea. And this is what I'm going to do about it. It's not enough to just change how you behave in the future. You've got to right the wrongs that you also committed as well, particularly if you truly want to be on this journey.
That's a good takeaway. And, as we wrap up here, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways today for our listeners to remember about handling microaggressions and being an effective ally?
If you can calmly and methodically make the aggressor see just how stupid they sound, that's a win. So hopefully that's one takeaway. Another takeaway is for the aggressors to realize that the impact of their aggression, there's nothing micro about it. And, and even calling it microaggression as a term is dismissive of the feelings of the victims of said microaggression. So challenging the term microaggression altogether is another takeaway. And then 3, like we said earlier, it's expensive to behave poorly.
As always, Ebbie reminds me that we're all still at work. We can implement his takeaways today, whether we think we might be the aggressor, the victim, an ally, or maybe all 3. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of Still at Work. And thanks to Ebbie for joining us and to our listeners who submitted such great questions. Do you have questions about how to navigate your workplace and everything that goes along with that? We can help. Go to the form in our show description to submit your question. While you're there, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, Still at Work, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also rate and leave our show a review to help others find us. That's it for today's episode. We'll see you soon.